Zimbabwe, Integrated Country Strategy of the United States of Zimbabwe. For public release. 1. Chief of Mission Priorities. Zimbabwe presents a more challenging environment for U.S. interests today than it did 3 years ago. President Mnangagwa has consolidated control of the ruling party and of government institutions, captured the judiciary, and marginalized the opposition. In the post-election period in 2018, soldiers shot and killed at least 6 people and injured many more. While quelling January 2019 demonstrations against a fuel price increase, troops killed 15 and committed 13 cases of rape and sexual assault. Human rights abuse, shrinking civic space, political intolerance, and polarization are likely to intensify as the 2023 elections approach. COVID-19 and the PRC have aided the government of Zimbabwe's continued oppression. Authorities have used COVID-19 as a reason to delay elections and to arrest opposition figures and rights advocates. The PRC has expanded its influence here, and with its no-questions-asked approach has become an indispensable bankroller and enabler of GO's bad behavior. In the PC, the GOS has found a wealthy patron that will never criticize its human rights record or push for difficult reforms and will gladly do business in a way that enriches ruling party elites. In return for its largesse, the PC earns near unfettered access to Zimbabwean natural resources. Zimbabwe's strategic importance to the United States is as a potential growth hub to help Zimbabwe fulfill its potential. The embassy invests in health, in line with the draft Joint Regional Strategy J's Goal 4, Inclusive Economic Growth and Resilience Goals 2 and 4, and perhaps most importantly, Improved Governance and a Strong Civil Society Goal 3. To the extent that the Zimbabwean economy functions, it does so for the benefit of a privileged few, including the president, his family, senior military officials, and a small group of elite ruling party and private sector actors. The country's vast natural and human resources remain underutilized. The embassy will use development and emergency assistance to help Zimbabwe's citizens and private sector address factors that inhibit inclusive economic growth and to expand livelihood opportunities, improve household nutrition, and strengthen coping mechanisms at household and community levels. Many of Zimbabwe's developmental and economic challenges stem from poor governance, corruption, and a failure of the rule of law. Citizens need the opportunity and capability to meaningfully participate in development and democratic processes. Zimbabwe must re-establish the rule of law and demonstrate respect for constitutionalism and human rights. The mission will support these ends by working with local civil society organizations while forging relationships with political, business, and government leaders who help bring citizen interests to key decision-makers. To increase the freedom and fairness of the 2023 elections, the embassy will deploy all available human and financial resources and work through diplomatic and development channels to advocate for proper electoral processes. Participation in those processes and advocate for GO's accountability and transparency. The U.S. will invest in the health of the people of Zimbabwe to preserve, sustain, and grow the human resources that a more prosperous, resilient Zimbabwe health assistance, particularly that which supports the development of sustainable health systems that provide services more equitably, will help the country become more peaceful, prosperous, and democratic. While Zimbabwe is on the cusp of HIV epidemic control, continued PEPFAR, malaria, family planning, COVID-19, and other investments will advance Zimbabwe's progress on the path to inclusive and sustainable development. Zimbabwe faces multiple environmental and other transnational challenges. Poaching and illegal wildlife trade remain a threat. Climate change continues to negatively affect agriculture, livelihoods, and nutrition. COVID-19 devastated the tourism sector, taking away jobs which incentivized communities to protect wildlife. Illegal mining, often connected to the PRC and the senior GOZ figures, causes environmental damage and denies the government substantial revenue that could theoretically fund critical services. Landmines cover swathes of the country's north and east, and a regional terrorist threat has emerged in Mozambique. We will protect biodiversity within Zimbabwe and in cross-border areas, mitigate and adapt to climate change, and make natural resources benefit the communities that live near them. We have prepared an End Wildlife Trafficking Act strategy to counter wildlife trafficking and illegal wildlife trade. Our engagement with the US private sector and our new status as a US Department of Commerce partner post will aid our transnational and environmental goals related to promoting US green technologies and border security. Increased funding for international narcotics and law enforcement, biodiversity, and climate change adaptation would catalyze progress toward these ends. Dialogue and cooperation with the GOZ and SAD regarding terrorism in neighbouring Mozambique present an opportunity to engage, through our defence attach with Zimbabwean and regional government officials and security services. Public diplomacy and communications staff across agencies will continue to use various media to highlight US perspectives to achieve our diplomatic and development goals, and to counter GOZ and PRC-funded disinformation. Among other things, we will support increased internationalization of tertiary academic institutions, promote US Zimbabwe exchange initiatives to highlight diverse perspectives and promote American values, and demonstrate, in counterpoint to PC investments, the results of our humanitarian and development efforts. The Consular section will support these efforts by facilitating legitimate travel for students, business persons, immigrants, and others seeking entry to the United States. Even more importantly, it will continue to protect the security and interests of US citizens in Zimbabwe. The COVID-19 pandemic remains the major immediate management challenge. As the pandemic subsides, more staff will return to work in person. Local staff will more fully share the workload that teleworking Americans have carried during the pandemic. Notably, the embassy lacks adequate workspaces for 100 of staff to return to the office while social distancing. Our other primary management challenge, an uncooperative host government, will likely remain throughout the period of the ICES, barring an unlikely electoral outcome in 2023. 2. Mission Strategic Framework. Mission Goal. Zimbabwe improves accountable, democratic governance that serves an engaged citizenry and respects fundamental human rights. Incorporates CDC's to number 3. Objective 1.1 Enhanced community participation in development and democratic processes. Objective 1.2 Improved rule of law, constitutionalism, and respect for human rights, leading to a more just and peaceful Zimbabwean society. Objective 1.3 Increased transparency and accountability of key governance, institutions and systems. Mission Goal 2 Zimbabwe has a market-oriented economy that provides an opportunity for all Zimbabweans to prosper. Objective 2.1 Improved business environment that encourages US, foreign and Zimbabwean investment. Objective 2.2 Expanded inclusive and sustainable economic opportunities. A corporate CDCs do number 1. Increased internationalization of tertiary education institutions. Mission Goal 3. Zimbabweans live longer, more productive, and healthier lives incorporates CDC's Mission Objective 3.1. Improved, accessible, and better functioning healthcare system for all, including members of underserved communities. Mission Goal 4. Zimbabwe becomes a responsible member of the global community and a reliable partner for addressing bilateral, regional, and global challenges. Mission Objective 4.1. Increased collaboration between the United States. Combat regional terrorism and stabilize Zimbabwe's borders. Objective 4.2. Improved GOS accountability to climate change-related commitments. Management Objective 1. In light of the COVID-19 pandemic, management will promote a more robust mission support government objectives. 3. Mission goals and objectives. Mission Goal 1 Key Zimbabwe improves accountable, democratic governance, serves an engaged citizenry, and respects fundamental human rights. Description: Zimbabwe's developmental and societal challenges are man-made, caused by poor governance, corruption, and major gaps in the rule of law. To reverse course, citizens need the opportunity and capability to fully and meaningfully participate in development and democratic processes. Zimbabwe must re-establish the rule of law, respect for constitutionalism, and human rights. Governance institutions and systems need to better hold the government to account for abuses of authority. An accountable government responds to citizen interests, allocates public resources, and invests in public services and infrastructure appropriately, resulting in long-term stability and reduced corruption. An accountable citizenry finds pragmatic ways to make its interests known to its government. The mission will achieve this objective by working with local civil society organizations while forging relationships with political, business and government leaders who help bring citizen interests to key decision-makers. Objective 1.1 Enhanced community participation in development and democratic processes. Justification: citizens have very little influence in government or societal processes affecting their lives. Lack of credible information. Barriers to participation, particularly for women, youth, and other marginalized groups. Violence during election periods. And loss of credibility in the electoral process combine to dampen participation. The Embassy strives to increase the amount and quality of citizen participation in development and democratic processes by improving access to information and reducing the barriers that prevent marginalized citizens from participating in governance and development processes. It also works to ensure that democratic processes, such as elections and legislative priority setting, are available for citizens to express their opinions and preferences. Linkages: this objective links with JPAP Objectives 1.4 and 4.1, and GS Objectives 1.1, 3.1, and 3.3. Risks as political reforms may face significant opposition or backtracking over time. Efforts across government institutions and civil society will look to create reinforcing mechanisms for supporting reforms in a sustainable manner. Our programs also seek to manage the risks presented by shrinking democratic space that make programs more challenging to implement, limited in scope, costly, dangerous, and illegal. We will give particular attention to efforts that engage marginalized and scapegoated populations, such as, but not limited to, LGBTQI people, women, ethnically and politically marginalized peoples, and allies. In these circumstances, the Department and USAID use rigorous program reviews to evaluate the cost-benefit of our engagement, as well as the risks to the security of our staff and partners. As needed, we will adjust our approach and scope while utilizing all the tools of assistance and diplomacy to advance efforts in Zimbabwe. We will focus on developing open, sustainable media that provide a variety of viewpoints and the free flow of ideas and facts, as well as support media efforts to shed light on government, accountability efforts, and expose corruption. We will also aim to address the growing phenomenon of exploitation of new information technologies corrupting the information landscape. Objective 1.2 Improved rule of law, constitutionalism, and respect for human rights leading to a more just and peaceful Zimbabwean society. Justification: the government of Zimbabwe's lack of commitment to the rule of law and constitutionalism affects all aspects of Zimbabwe's growth and development and is the single most pervasive barrier to fostering self-reliance. Zimbabwe's 2013 constitution is progressive, establishing a unitary state, recognizing socio-economic rights, calling for parity between men and women, and establishing a constitutional court. However, the government has not implemented key provisions that would lead to more democratic governance, including devolution of power to lower levels of government. Access to justice and judicial process are vital to ensure neither nor Zimbabwe citizens languish in prison. There are currently institutional impediments to providing emergency services to Americans, and these impediments have an adverse impact on tourism and U.S. business investment. With effective rule of law, business can operate in an environment that supports rather than interferes with foreign direct investment, encouraging skilled citizens in the diaspora to repatriate with their knowledge, networks, and financial capital. Moreover, until existing laws are aligned to the Constitution, key protections for citizens are not instrumentalized, and citizens, particularly human rights defenders, journalists, and opposition political candidates, lack sufficient protection under linkages, and this objective links with JTEPF.USP 1.3 and 4.1, JES Objectives 3.1, 3.2, and 3.3. and the President's Memorandum on establishing the fight against corruption as a United States national security interest, and risks of pushing for political reforms, especially those that increase transparency, accountability, or diversity in representation, and reduce corruption, may result in an increase in government persecution of human rights defenders. Moreover, promoting the rule of law and constitutionalism risks perpetuating the host government view that we have a regime change agenda. Our programs seek to manage the risks presented by shrinking democratic space in Zimbabwe that make programs more challenging to implement, limited in scope, costly, dangerous, and illegal. We will give particular attention to efforts that engage systematically marginalized and scapegoated populations, such as, but not limited to, LGBT people, women's rights advocates, and ethnically and politically marginalized people. In these circumstances, the Department and USAID use rigorous program reviews to evaluate the cost-benefit of our engagement, as well as the risks to the security of our staff and partners. As needed, we will adjust our approach and scope while using all the tools of assistance and diplomacy to advance efforts in the region. Objective 1.3 Increased transparency and accountability of key governance, institutions, and systems. Justification. Despite its public promises, the government of Zimbabwe remains unresponsive and largely unaccountable to the people of Zimbabwe at all levels. Basic government functions lack transparency and corruption is pervasive. Instead, democratic space seems to be shrinking as the government adopts repressive legislation and clamps down on civil society organizations. The United States will continue efforts to support and empower key reformers and institutions of government at all levels to promote access to justice, improve accountability mechanisms, strengthen checks on executive power, deliver public services, and incorporate citizen-responsive and socially inclusive governance practices. A key pillar of this work is to reduce corruption and its corrosive effects on democratic institutions and the people they serve. At the core of our efforts is the promotion of democratic, transparent, effective, and accountable governments with institutions that both empower citizens and respond to citizens' aspirations and basic needs. A foundation of citizen-centered and socially inclusive democratic governance is essential to building citizen confidence in a country's future. We will continue to support anti-corruption activities to build investigative capacities and promote citizen awareness of individual rights and responsibilities. Linkages had this objective links with JPSAP's Objectives 1.3, 3.1 and 4.1 and JES Objectives 3.1 and 4.1. Risks are as noted in a recent investigative report about corruption in Zimbabwe. The illicit trade in natural resources and commodities is linked to the highest levels of the state. As such, efforts to expose and deter corruption and promote accountability and transparency faces strong headwinds. Risks include the government targeting civil society actors with misinformation, intimidation, harassment, and To mitigate some of this risk, the United States will work with Parliament to better exercise its oversight role in the extractives industry and in how the government takes on debt. Moreover, USAID will grant branding and marking waivers to local partners where appropriate. In these challenging circumstances, the Department and USAID use rigorous program reviews to evaluate the cost-benefit of our engagement, as well as the risks to the security of our staff and partners. As needed, we will adjust our approach and scope while utilizing all the tools of assistance and diplomacy to advance efforts in the region. Mission Goal 2N Zimbabweans have a market-oriented economy that provides an opportunity for all Zimbabweans to prosper. Description: despite vast human and natural resource potential, the ruling party's long-standing use of policy and government institutions to channel resources into party members and other elites' pockets hampers broad-based economic growth, in addition to generally improved governance, as detailed in Mission Goal 1. Macroeconomic policy must improve for Zimbabwe to begin realizing its economic potential, and investment, both foreign and domestic, must increase. The mission will strive to help US firms take advantage of commercial opportunities without inadvertently putting resources in the hands of malign actors, while also advising US firms on Zimbabwe's business climate. Said development and humanitarian investments will focus on helping individuals and small and medium-sized enterprises in the agriculture and conservation sectors to improve livelihoods and nutrition, while preventing shocks, especially as related to weather and macroeconomic events, from forcing vulnerable populations into negative coping habits. SAID investments will put particular emphasis on youth and women, as their economic enfranchisement and participation are key to a better future for Zimbabweans. Objective 2.1: Improved business environment that encourages US foreign Zimbabwean investment justification. Poor economic policies have led to Zimbabwe's decades-long economic decline. The government plays an outsized role in the economy, crowding out investment in the private sector. Inefficient, market-distorting controls over key sectors like agriculture and mining restrict the ability of Zimbabweans to fully participate in economic opportunities. The government of Zimbabwe's mismanagement has resulted in an uncompetitive economy with high levels of debt, corruption, poverty, and food insecurity. An improved business environment in Zimbabwe requires structural reforms that restore macroeconomic stability and create sustainable growth. Reforms toward a market-oriented economy will provide an opportunity for all Zimbabweans to thrive and promote US prosperity through new markets for US businesses and investors. Linkages with this objective links with Status Aid Joint Strategic Plan Goal 2, including Objectives 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3, and the Bureau of African Affairs. Bureau of Africa Joint Regional Strategy Goal 1, Objectives 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3. Risks good macroeconomic policy is based more on evidence and logic than it is on politics. Given the approaching 2023 elections, the GOZ's penchant for prioritizing short-term objectives, the politicization of policy, and the control of many institutions by elites more interested in self-enrichment than in good policy-making, the mission's ability to successfully push for improved economic policy will be limited. Coordination with other bilateral and multilateral stakeholders could increase the odds successful mission engagement on policy matters. Zimbabwe's unstable two-currency system presents additional challenges to the economy at a time of heightened political tensions. Objective 2.2: Expanded, inclusive, and sustainable economic opportunities. Justification RK. Government activities will support Zimbabwe citizens' private sector to address those factors that inhibit the country's economic growth by expanding livelihood opportunities, improving household nutrition, and addressing weaknesses of coping mechanisms at household and community levels that are manifestations of the inadequate resilience of vulnerable populations to recover from climate variability, extreme weather-related, and other shocks in Zimbabwe. USAID humanitarian and development assistance will help rural and urban Zimbabweans expand their economic opportunities and help them mitigate and adapt to climate change. As agriculture is the backbone of Zimbabwe's economy and food production is essential for food security, USAID interventions will engage with the private sector to build their capacity towards providing quality agricultural goods and services and incentivize them to invest in the scale-up of their enterprises to meet domestic and international demand. The interventions will also target vulnerable populations, including refugees and asylum seekers, through investments in alternative livelihoods that will diversify their sources of household income and increase their access to nutritious foods. Strengthening these areas will build a strong foundation for Zimbabweans to take advantage of inclusive and sustainable economic opportunities that will contribute to regional stability, a more competitive market environment for US investment, and a more socially cohesive and engaged citizenry. Linkages and these interventions will complement Mission Objectives 2.1. 3.1. Improved food security through USAID interventions that increase nutritious foods and alternative livelihoods will contribute to increasing the number of Zimbabweans who live longer and healthier lives. Social cohesion building efforts by USAID partners will increase civilian governance in their communities, particularly when it comes to management of natural resources and shared community structures. Efforts under this objective also contribute to draft JAWS sub-objectives 2.2, 2 and 2.23 related to the empowerment of youth, women, and other marginalized populations, and the growth of small and medium enterprises, and Objectives 4.22 Climate Change Mitigation and Adaptation, and 4.4 Economic Empowerment of Youth. Efforts will also support 21 state 97,546 and draft JSP Goals 2 and Strategic Objective 1.2. Risks a U.S. government activities could suffer if increased political destabilizes the economy or inhibits the implementation of activities by local organizations. Additionally, unreliable access to foreign exchange and the depreciation of the local currency reduces the availability of and the ability of agribusinesses to produce or import agricultural inputs such as seeds and fertilizers or productivity-enhancing and climate-smart technologies. Extreme natural disasters and frequent seasonal adverse weather situations could severely affect the natural resources and agricultural infrastructure in beneficiary communities. Finally, the government of Zimbabwe remains unready or uncommitted to self-reliance, leading to a USAID focus on carrying out what should be national government-led and resourced public health efforts and recurring humanitarian assistance due to natural and economic disasters, which can detract from efforts to achieve longer-term development priorities. To mitigate these risks, the mission uses a range of partners, which in turn use a range of sub-partners to pursue its agenda. It builds development elements into its humanitarian efforts, and USAID efforts to support livelihoods related to agriculture, ecotourism, and non-timber forest products boosts, albeit to a small degree, the economy's diversification and thus its resilience to shocks. Objective 2.3 Increased internationalization of tertiary education institutions. A justification Zimbabwe's over 40 educated professionals embody the results of long-time, high-quality people-to-people investments. Zimbabwe's rising leaders, however, seek their education and training from a competing set of international partners, including strategic rivals such as China and Russia. EU government resources across the interagency aim to deepen professional linkages between tertiary institutions and establish research networks to achieve our objectives in health, economics, agriculture, governance, and rule of law. Public diplomacy exchanges and education USA counseling will orient Zimbabwe's successor generation towards US ideals, principles, and democratic practices. As linkages, this objective links with JESAP Objectives 2.2 and JAYS Objectives 2.2, 3.3, 4.1, and 4.4. Risks and the subjective factors in the risk of inadequate political will by the ruling party to respect tertiary institutions' need for academic independence, to sufficiently allocate funding, and to allocate critical senior leadership positions to loyal members of the party. Our focus on both government and private universities who have expressed genuine interest in excellence mitigates some risk. Further, the planned activities intentionally focus on exchanges of maximum utility, such as exploring how American universities leverage public-private partnerships to sustain excellent tertiary education. Mission Goal 3: Zimbabweans live longer, more productive, and healthier lives. Description: the United States is committed to seeing Zimbabwe become a self-reliant, resourceful, and resilient nation responsive to the needs of its population and capable of planning, financing, and implementing solutions to its development challenges, with thriving economic and health systems. As the United States seeks to advance democratic and transparent governance in Zimbabwe under Goal 1 US, engagement and assistance will invest in the people of Zimbabwe, in health services, humanitarian assistance, food security, and economic growth, to preserve, sustain, and grow the human capital and a more prosperous, thriving, and resilient Zimbabwe in the future. Economic and health assistance, especially given the evolving political and economic context in Zimbabwe, will help the country become more peaceful, prosperous, and democratic by supporting Zimbabwe on its path to inclusive and sustainable development with a healthy and productive population. US security and prosperity objectives are reinforced. Objective 3.1: improved, accessible, and better functioning healthcare system for all, including members of underserved communities. Justification: Zimbabwe has experienced severe challenges related to the deterioration of the healthcare infrastructure, loss of experienced health sector personnel, and a drastic decline in the quality of health services available to the population. The US government is making significant contributions through the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, the President's Malaria Initiative PMIR, USAID Programming on Tuberculosis P, Maternal and Child Health, Planning of Productive Health, and CDC Programming on Outbreak Responses and Field Epidemiology Training. Such efforts rebuild, train, and improve health. Zimbabwe help to increase the overall health of all Zimbabweans. The investments to increase the health of Zimbabweans are necessary for economic growth. The decimation of the working population would contribute to further economic collapse in Zimbabwe. Key health sectors targeted for USG support include health, malaria, TB, maternal and child health, outbreak response, and broader health systems strength. As the PEPFAR program approaches the UNAIDS 95-95-95 goals that define epidemic control, it is essential to focus on sustainability and building local capacity to maintain epidemic control when This aligns with JESP. Objective 2.2. Linkages E efforts under this objective will support Strategic Objective 1.1 of the draft JESC. Leadership in strengthening global health security. This objective also ties to JESP Objective 2.2 and links to ICE Objective 1.1, as a healthy and economically productive population will help drive social, political, and economic development. It will also support draft as Objective 4.1 related to strengthening African health systems, risks the government of Zimbabwe was heavily dependent on donor support in the health sector. Salaries and training for public sector health workers is inadequate, and Zimbabwe is experiencing high levels of attrition. Support for Zimbabwean healthcare workers, from high-level policy positions to village cadres, mitigates the impact of this attrition, but at the expense of GOZ ownership and long-term sustainability. PEPFAR embarked on an inventory of human resources for health authorities, assistance to GOZ in 2021, and is using this information to better coordinate HRH efforts with other donors and ultimately cap that support to GOZ, while simultaneously developing a roadmap to sustainability in partnership with GOZ. Macroeconomic challenges constrain the GOZ's ability to finance the health sector, and health financing policies lack implementation and resources, and there is limited engagement with the private sector. Performance against global governance indicators continues to deteriorate. The USG regularly coordinates with other donors and organizations to maximize investments in health and hold the GOZ accountable for investments made in the health sector. Long-term sustainability planning will continue in all US-funded health programs. Transition planning as the PEPFAR program draws nearer to achieving epidemic control. US government investments and priorities will focus on accomplishing the mission and begin to shift from intensive, broad-based direct service delivery to building enduring capabilities and lasting collaborations. A critical part of accomplishing the mission is ensuring equity in service delivery and subpopulations with persistently high HIV incidence rates, such as adolescent girls and young women and key populations. PEPFAR will shift HIV resources from international organizations to local indigenous, community and faith-based organizations to ensure successful, long-term, local partner engagement and impact. US government resources through PEPFAR will accelerate efforts to strengthen national health information systems to ensure that real-time data can be used to identify hotspots, subpopulation drivers of new infections by age and sex, and increase the quality of services provided through expanded utilization of electronic health records. PEPFAR's transition from direct service delivery to a technical assistance model will ensure that it can maintain support for epidemic control. This aligns with JSP Objective 2.2. Mission Goal 4A. Zimbabwe becomes a responsible member of the global community and a reliable partner for addressing bilateral, regional, and challenges. Description: a safer and more environmentally responsible Zimbabwe combined with a more secure SAT-CDGN contributes to a safer America. Countering global threats such as instability, terrorism, transnational crime, and climate change in Zimbabwe and SADC directly benefits the United States by reducing illicit trafficking, eradicating dangerous landmines, preventing the spread of terrorism, and protecting the environment and wildlife in this diverse and important region. Bolstering Zimbabwe's responsible management of regional challenges facilitates its transition from an assistance recipient to an enduring partner. Objective 4.1: an increased collaboration between the United States and SADC to regional terrorism and stabilize Zimbabwe's borders. Justification: Zimbabwe is a relevant participant in Southern Africa's regional security efforts, including demining, counter-terrorism, security operations, and regional partnerships, both bilaterally and through its participation in the Southern African Development Community (SADC). This objective supports commitment to countering instability, transnational crime, and terrorism in Southern Africa that threaten U.S. interests. Mission HARA must promote increased engagement, information sharing, and coordination with the government of Zimbabwe, chiefly through the Zimbabwean Defense Forces as well as within the SADC-CDGN. There is no training the U.S. Department of Defense can offer Zimbabwean Defense Forces DARE based on U.S. policy. Therefore, engagement with SADC offers of an opportunity to work on ZDF-relevant security issues in a broader context, in line with U.S. Policy. A stable and ethical Zimbabwean security sector will increase Southern African security, which increases opportunities for US visitors, investments, and businesses. Secure borders and a stable security sector hinder trade-based money laundering that could fund crime and terrorism and rob the Zimbabwean government of tax revenue to provide services to its citizenry. Linkages in this objective links to Objective 1.2. Improve the capability. Security forces, including defense and civilian security sector actors, to identify, respond to ongoing transnational threats posed by terrorism and violent extremism, organized crime, maritime insecurity, and border insecurity. Risks. See USA's Polistrict, how the embassy can engage with the Zimbabwean military, including prohibitions on a wide range of military-to-military engagements and many forms of cooperation. This places the United States at a disadvantage. Zimbabwe with respect to great power competition. Objective 4.2. Improved GOS accountability to climate change-related commitment. A justification. The government of Zimbabwe GOV views global climate change. Serious issue with a greater focus on the potential impacts of global climate change, including on water supply and food security, than on reducing Zimbabwe's emission of greenhouse gases. Zimbabwe, like much of Africa, remains constrained by its inability to take appropriate measures because of the lack of human, institutional, and financial will and resources. The GOS signs on to climate change agreements and produces reports and policies, but does not back up the plans with action. SAID's programming under this objective could bolster water management, improve land use, and promote environmental education, and mitigate the effects of climate change. Mission efforts under Goal 1, particularly 1.1, related to citizen participation in governance and development processes, will also contribute to mission climate priorities. While the elite can easily weather, the average Zimbabwean cannot and is therefore more likely to press for policies that address climate change. Linkages in this objective links directly to the draft JRC Objective 4.2, 21 State 97,546, and draft Strategic Objective 1.2. Risks in Zimbabwe's climate will become more erratic, with increased rainfall variability, droughts, dry spells, flooding, and a temperature increase of between 1.5 to 2.2 degrees Celsius by the 2050s. Some projections suggest that widespread crop failure will occur 3 out of every 5 years. Continued population growth will likely exacerbate competition for and degradation of the natural resource base, contribute to an increase in greenhouse gas emissions, intensify land use change afforestation, and increase vulnerability to climate-related hazards. These trends threaten water resources, human health, and Zimbabwe's forests. Ecosystems, which provide food, income, fuel, and other environmental services to vulnerable populations. Within the time span of the ICES, the severity of climate change will be relatively minor compared to the long-term outlook. But the implications of inaction mean that the risk is very high. 4. Management Objective 1. In light of the COVID-19 pandemic, management will provide a more robust mission support platform to advance US government objectives. Justification: the mission seeks to ensure effectiveness and accountability. We will focus on strengthening the mission's infrastructure, improving workforce performance and accountability, and bolstering safety and security for its people. The mission will concentrate its financial, physical, and human resources to support US diplomatic and development investments. In linkages, the objective links to all other sections' objectives, as the Management CAS service platform exists to drive and support all mission activities. His government obstruction prevents or delays mission actions. For example, the host government has refused to properly accredit diplomats in the past, and without a resolution to the accreditation problem, the mission may lack qualified and accredited staff to achieve these objectives. In-person work at the mission may be disrupted or minimized due to host government anti-COVID-19 measures or civil unrest surrounding 2023 elections. ZANU-PF operatives may harass